Hello, I'm Fukuzawa from The Best Landscapes Are Found in Books. This time, I will explain the book For the People of Japan and the World to Have a Peaceful, Bright, and Hopeful Future, written by Akihiko Kuniyoshi, an author who has studied Japanese history and society for many years. In the beginning of this book, Mr. Kuniyoshi says, Spark of Creation. He writes, The moment human history began, it was the spark of creation that we made our own food by ourselves. According to the Old Testament, God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. But was there any other creature on earth that created something with its own hands? This book describes the mission that Japanese people living in this age must fulfill. By learning about the history of intellectual production activities in Japan and having a sense of pride in being Japanese. This book is recommended for those who want to maintain their Japanese identity in an international community. By knowing this book, you will be able to answer and think based on your Japanese identity. Let's consider what the Japanese should do to meet the challenges of the new era, from the perspective of spark of creation, the starting point of human historical activities. This time, based on what I learned from reading this book, I would like to share 1. Human history and intellectual production activities, and 2. Intellectual production activities in Japan. In this article, I will explain in this order. I hope you enjoy it. I will explain about 1. Human history and intellectual production activities. First of all, let's take a look at the meaning of intellectual production activities. The term intellectual production means creating intellectual products in business situations. It refers to something that is produced mainly using the brain, such as computer programs, accounting calculations, plans, and blueprints for machines and buildings. In other words, work that requires the use of the mind is intellectual production, and the content of such activities is called intellectual production activities. The opposite of intellectual production activity is labor production activity. In this book, the author writes about humans' intellectual production activities. Humans are the only species in the natural world that intelligently produce food to feed themselves, allowing them to thrive without being constrained by natural selection to secure food. In other words, the production of food was the first intelligent, productive activity of mankind, and by securing food, we created the conditions for increased human prosperity. For organisms, the ability to secure food necessary to sustain life is an absolute prerequisite for survival, and all organisms can survive and continue to thrive only if they are blessed with life-sustaining food and the environment and conditions that allow their species to thrive. For humans, the spark of creation from hunting to food production was the greatest evolutionary moment in human history. In response to the progress and development of daily intellectual production activities, the environment surrounding regions and people, as well as cultures and civilizations, are born, and the history of humanity is created through the accumulation of these activities. In other words, the history of human intellectual production activities is the history of food. In this book, we will look at the history of mankind and explain in more detail the intellectual production activities of mankind. There are many difficult explanations about humanity, intellectual production, food, and history. But if you listen to the end, you will be amazed. This is what the value of the Japanese is all about. I'm sure you'll understand what the value of the Japanese is. Today, humanity's intellectual production activities are not only on the Earth, but are also expanding into outer space and are steadily building their achievements. It is also a challenge of humanity's eternal existence and endless intellectual production activities. It is important for all people to focus on and activate their intellectual and productive activities for a brighter future, instead of being led astray by others who are seduced by dreamless and meaningless conflicts and heroic dreams of being the best in the world. That is the only way to push forward the history of humanity into the future. Continuing to pursue this intellectual production activity is the eternal challenge of humanity, and in other words, the path we should take. Politics provides the mechanism to revitalize and promote this activity, while the economy stores the results of this activity and contributes to the further progress and development of culture and civilization through the accumulation of capital and investment, and the further advancement and development of intellectual production activities. Another important factor is education. In order to stimulate intellectual production activities, the record and legacy of progress is what education must be, and it must become a force for greater human progress. The book goes on to discuss what intellectual production activities in humanity should be. There's more to come. Please follow me. Next, I will now explain about 2 intellectual production activities in Japan. In order for the Japanese people to face a peaceful, bright, and hopeful future, we must have a clear vision of Japan's past, present, and future. To do so, it is necessary to correctly analyze Japan's history and clarify the path that led to the present and will continue to develop into the future. The history of Japan is the culture, civilization, nation, politics, and economy born from the intellectual production activities in the land of Japan. Intellectual production activities have progressed dramatically with the participation of a wide range of people and the accumulation of new knowledge and experience, as well as people's thinking, creativity, and ingenuity, has promoted the progress and development of society. The transition from the Jomon to the Yayoi period in Japan was symbolic of the reformation of intellectual production activities. From the days of natural gathering and processing of a few products, many people began to engage in the common task of rice cultivation through paddy farming, and people began to aim for prosperity and development in an organized manner. In this book, it is mentioned that in order for Japanese people to survive and develop as Japanese people in the world, we must not neglect basic education and effort to pass on Japanese history, traditions, and culture from generation to generation, so that Japanese people can be Japanese. I foresee a frightening future where if we fail to educate ourselves in these areas, Japan's history and survival as a nation will become difficult, and we will simply be a group of people living in a region called Japan. The survival of Japan is the result of the crystallization of the blood, sweat, and tears of the Japanese people. And in other words, the strong will of each Japanese person sincerely wishing for the survival and development of Japan is now needed. Finally, here is the definition in this book of education as the foundation of intellectual production activities in Japan. Goals and future of education. 1. Be aware and proud to be Japanese through the history Japan has experienced. 2. Cultivate an awareness of goals to strive for, and the obligations to fulfill to ensure a bright future for Japan. 3. Inherit the knowledge and skills needed to achieve goals. So, to summarize this video, 1. History of humanity and intellectual production activities. For humans, the spark of creation from hunting to food production was the greatest evolutionary moment in human history. In response to the progress and development of daily intellectual production activities, the environment surrounding regions and people, as well as cultures and civilizations, were born, and the history of humanity was created through the accumulation of these activities. 2. Intellectual production activities in Japan. In order for Japanese people to survive and develop in the world as Japanese, we must not neglect the basic education of passing on Japanese history, traditions, and culture to people from generation to generation. The survival of Japan is the result of the solidification of the blood, sweat, and tears of the Japanese people. And as Japanese, now is the time to have a strong will for the sincere hope of survival and development of Japan. There are still many parts of the book for the people of Japan and the world to have a peaceful, bright, and hopeful future that I have not yet introduced, so please read this book. The link is posted in the summary section below. I hope that this knowledge will help you in some way in your life. In this way, this channel provides easy to understand, quick 10-minute explanations of books, as well as introduces useful knowledge for life. Please subscribe and leave a high rating on our channel so you don't miss our latest videos. See you in the next video.